Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with French, German and British leaders in London in what German Chancellor Friedrich Merz called a decisive time for peace talks.
Antonio Costa has rejected any attempt to interfere in European politics in response to a controversial document released by the Trump administration last week. Celebrations kicked off across Syria as people marked 1 year since the fall of longtime strongman President Bashar al-Assad.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with French, German and British leaders in London on Monday in what German Chancellor Friedrich Merz called a decisive time for peace talks to end Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Following the talks, Merz said he was skeptical over certain aspects of the US-backed peace deal.
We are still and remain strongly behind Ukraine and giving support to your country, because we all know that the destiny of this country is the destiny of Europe. So that's the reason why we are here, trying to figure out what we can do. And nobody should doubt on our support for Ukraine.
Europeans are expected to shoulder the bulk of security guarantees if a ceasefire is struck between the two warring countries. Leaders have been scrambling to ensure their position is heard ever since Washington's peace plan that heavily favored Russia was leaked in late November.
And now I think the main issue is a convergence between our common positions, Europeans and Ukrainians, and the US to finalize these peace negotiations and re-engage a new phase in the best possible conditions for Ukraine, for the Europeans, and for our collective security.
The show of support comes after US President Donald Trump criticized Zelensky, telling reporters on Sunday that the Ukrainian president hadn't read the proposal. Zelensky was expected in Brussels on Monday evening for talks with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and EU chiefs Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa.
After 3 days of talks between US and Ukrainian delegations in Florida, Donald Trump says Zelensky is not ready for a peace deal with Russia. Speaking to reporters at the 2025 Kennedy Center honors, he accused the Ukrainian leader of holding up the talks from moving forward.
And I have to say that I'm a little bit disappointed that President Zelensky hasn't yet read the proposal. That was as of a few hours ago. His people love it, but he hasn't. Russia's fine with it.
However, Russian President Vladimir Putin hasn't publicly expressed approval for the White House plan. Trump was the first president to hold the Kennedy Center honors, a role normally assumed by journalists and presenters. He says he did so, quote, at the request of a certain television network. During his speech, he praised Sylvester Stallone, Kiss, and Gloria Gaynor, among others.
At least one person was killed and more than 15 others were injured in overnight Russian strikes across Ukraine. A civilian was killed as Russian forces targeted several areas in Dnipropetrovsk, including the city of Dnipro in the early hours of Monday. Local officials say a barrage of drones and artillery was fired across the region, damaging residential buildings, private homes, and civilian vehicles. At least 7 people were injured in the northern Sumy region after it sustained heavy strikes which started late on Sunday and continued into Monday. Several floors of a 9-story residential building were severely damaged in the strikes. Officials say some residents were trapped inside the damaged apartment building and were rescued by emergency workers. Rescue operations were reportedly temporarily suspended, however, as officials feared repeated attacks were incoming. The adjacent Chernihiv region also came under heavy overnight Russian shelling, injuring at least 3 people. One person was hospitalized after sustaining moderate wounds after a Russian drone exploded near a residential building. The blast shattered windows and caused damage to the building, parked vehicles, gas pipelines, and nearby stores and shops. European Council President Antonio Costa rejected any attempt at political interference in response to a controversial U.S. government document published last week criticizing Europe. The document, released by the Trump administration, called on Europe to change course and tighten immigration or face what they called civilizational erasure. It also noted that it will support, quote, like-minded patriotic parties across the continent to cultivate resistance.
Donc, on a des différences sur notre vision du monde. Mais ça va au-delà de ça. C'est certes que cette stratégie continue à parler de l'Europe en tant qu'allié. C'est bien. Mais si on est des alliés, on doit agir en tant qu'alliés. Et les alliés ne menacent pas de l'interférence dans la vie, dans le choix politique intérieur de ces alliés. On les respecte. On respecte la souveraineté des uns et des autres. Sûrement, plusieurs Européens ne partagent pas la même vision que les Américains sur des différents sujets. Et c'est naturel qu'ils ne partagent pas la même vision qu'on a. Ce qu'on ne peut pas accepter, c'est cette menace d'interférence dans la vie politique de l'Europe. Les États-Unis ne peuvent pas remplacer les citoyens européens pour choisir quels sont les bons partis et les mauvais partis. Les États-Unis ne peuvent pas remplacer l'Europe sur la vision qu'on a de la liberté d'expression.
The 33-page document also argued that a combination of ill-designed economic policies, excessive regulation, and illegal migration could lead to Europe's demise as a civilization. Washington says its goal is to help Europe change its current trajectory, a sentiment European lawmakers have slammed as unacceptable. Celebrations kicked off across Syria to mark 1 year since the ousting of longtime strongman President Bashar al-Assad. These were the scenes in the capital Damascus. People cheered, fireworks were set off, and the new Syrian flags were raised and waved. And the country's transitional president, Ahmed al-Shara, delivered a message promising bright and stable times ahead.
أيها الشعب السوري الكريم، لقد أثبتتم للعالم أن النصر مجرد بداية. تعالوا بنا جميعا نكمل الحكاية، حكاية شعب صمد وصبر فأعزه الله ونصره. تعالوا لنجعل من النصر مسؤولية تتجلى فينا جدا وعملا وعدالة ورحمة لننهض بوطننا الحبيب نحو مصاف الدول المتقدمة بإذن الله.
The message appears to have been well received by the Syrian public.
طبعا الذكرى لا تختصر بكلمة ولا تختزل بموقف، إنها فرحة عظيمة، وأجمل ما فيها كلمة السيد الرئيس الذي عبر عن ما فعل في سنة كاملة من أمل وطموحات وما سيرسم إن شاء الله في المرحلة القادمة.
December 8th does not just mark the end of Bashar's rule for the people of Syria. It's the end of the Assad dynasty, which started with his father Hafez back in 1971. It's also an opportunity for Syrians to remember the estimated 600,000 people who lost their lives in 14 years of brutal civil war.
The Liberal candidate Ciprian Ciucu has been elected mayor of Romania's capital, Bucharest, receiving around 36% of the vote in the local election. His opponent, Anca Alexandrescu, a journalist supported by the hard-right Alliance for Romanian Unity Party, received around 22% of votes.
Vreau să fac din București proiectul vieții mele. Și asta nu pentru termen scurt, ci pentru termen lung. Pentru că orașele care se schimbă cu adevărat au nevoie de primari care să stea pe termen lung primari și să-și poată pune în aplicare viziunea.
The election came after former mayor Nicu Sordan was elected president earlier this year, leaving the position open. The mayoral office in Romania's capital is politically significant, as two former mayors later became the country's president.
The new mayor of Bucharest has some difficult tasks ahead. First of all, he must solve the problem of the heating system. After that, the problem of the traffic and the pollution. And he must do that in a complicated political situation with our government caught in the middle, a coalition made by 4 parties.
Prema iskustvu našem dugogodišnjem zimskoga kupanja i proučavanjem stručne kao i znanstvene literature možemo reći da su benefiti veliki. Prvenstveno jedna poboljšanje cirkulacije, poboljšanje rada srca, rad pluća, znači elasticiteta krvnih žila, što je vrlo bitno, pogotovo kod starih ljudi, jačanje imuniteta u ove zimske razdoblje.
Danas su nam se pridružili opatijski kukali koji će zajedno sa našim gostima sudjelovati u tradicionalnom zimskom kupanju u moru. Posljednje vrijeme sve veći je interes za zdravstvenim turizmom i upravo se naš grad po tome izdvaja.
Wir neugeboren, wir jung.
Wir schwimmen auch zu Hause im Wörthersee und da ist das auch ein tolles Erlebnis, im Meer zu schwimmen.